Let's add an Angular service. And again, I do assume that you know what Angular services are and why we would use them. We can generate it with the Ionic generate command again. If you hit enter, you'll see that in there, you can select a service. Of course, you can also type Ionic generate service and then the name or the path of the service. But for now, I'll go with the dropdown. So now I'm asked for the name or path of the service. And I want to create a recipes service, so I'll create it in the recipes folder, and then the name of the service will also be recipes. So recipes/recipes it is, and this gives me a new recipes service in the recipes folder. Now this automatically gets @injectable provided in root, which ensures that this is provided application-wide. We can use the same instance of the service in any component, any page of the entire app. And of course, here it's important that we use the same instance so that if our recipes data would change, it is reflected in all components and not just in components using that specific service instance. And therefore, now this is our service. I will now take my recipes I have set up in the recipes page and cut them from there, and instead add them here to the recipes service. Now, having the recipes in here is, of course, nice, but now we need them back in the recipes page, right? Now, how do we do that? Well, it is a public property, so we could just access it like this. However, I will turn it into a private property so that we can't just access it like this. And instead, I'll add a method, which I'll name getAllRecipes. You can name it however you want. And there I will return, let's say, a copy of that recipe array, so that if we then would added the array returned by this method inside of the component, we wouldn't added the original array. And this is simply related to how arrays and objects work in JavaScript, and that they are reference types and not primitives. Attached, you find an article and video where I dive a bit deeper into that in case you're interested. So here I'll create a copy with the spread operator by pointing at this recipes. Now what this does is it pulls all the elements of this array out of it and then adds it to a new array down there. And then I return this new array, which is a perfect copy of the old array. Not of the objects in the array, but of the array itself at least. Now, I can also already add a getRecipe method, which requires a recipe ID as an argument, and this will return a single recipe for that ID. So here I want to return this, recipes, and then I can use the find method, which is a default JavaScript method I can use on arrays. And this method takes a function which will execute on every element in the array. And then if this function returns true, we basically tell find that this is the object we were looking for, and it will stop execution and not run find on any other element in the array and give us back that element it was running on instead. So the function I pass here gets the recipe as an input because, again, it executes this function on every element in the array, and this is an array of recipes, so what we get in every function execution is a single recipe. And there I want to return true if this is the recipe I'm looking for, and false otherwise. And therefore here in this condition, I will compare the ID of the recipe I'm looking at with the recipe ID I got as an argument. And if these are equal, then I have the recipe I want to return, and then I do return it. Now here, just as with the array, I will create a copy of that object by wrapping this whole call here in curly braces, and then I can use the spread operator here as well. And this will pull out all the properties of the returned recipe object and add them into a new object. So this is now the service we can use in the recipes page and the recipe detail page. And this is already Angular's state management in action. It isn't very complex here, but writing a similar logic in your vanilla JavaScript app would already be more complicated, and it will become more complicated throughout the course, where we will have more and more complex state management. So now the recipe service is what I want to use in my components, and as you know, we can get access to a service by injecting it into a component. So here in the recipes page component, I want to inject the recipes service. And for that, you need to define the type here, recipes service, and you need to import that from your recipes service file. By the way, in the recipes service, you should also make sure you're importing that recipe model. So let's add this. You can click the light bulb here to get help with that. So the recipe model is required because we're referencing it here in the service. But back to the page now. In the page, I'm now injecting the recipes service, and I'm using that TypeScript shortcut where I automatically assign the argument I'm getting here to a private property of this entire class so that I can use the recipe service anywhere in the class and not just in the constructor. ng-on-init then always is a great place for initialization work. So here I want to call recipe service get all recipes. This returns an array of recipes, and I want to store this in this component. And therefore here I will re-add my recipes array like this. But initially this is undefined, and it will be set here. So I will set recipes, this recipes, so my local property here, equal to the recipes returned by get all recipes. Now what all that gives us is that if I now save this, it will recompile and give us the exact same look as before. But now we'll also be able to tap into a single recipe on the recipe detail page. Let's do that next.